I knit sweaters for all my grandkids every Christmas. This year not a single one called, not even to say thank you. My daughter said, "They're teenagers now. Get over it." So I donated every gift, every keepsake, every family memory, to kids who actually smiled. Now they call me Grandma. And my phone finally rings. The package sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation. Returned to sender, unopened. 3 weeks after Christmas, and there it was. Bryce's sweater, the one I'd spent 47 hours knitting, complete with cables that matched his grandfather's favorite fishing vest. The postal service had stamped it with red ink. Refused return to sender. I stared at that box until my coffee went cold, remembering the night I'd finished it. December 15th, 2 in the morning, my arthritic fingers cramping as I wove in the final threads. Josh's old flannel shirt lay beside me, the blue and gray one he'd worn every Saturday morning while teaching the kids to fish. I'd carefully unraveled strips of it, incorporating them into the sweater's pattern. Pieces of their grandfather, literally woven into something meant to keep Bryce warm. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd refused warmth itself. Chloe's sweater had been even more intricate. A delicate Fair Isle pattern in dusty rose and cream, colors that would complement her auburn hair perfectly. I'd started it in September, working evenings while watching her old dance recitals on my tablet. Each stitch held a memory, her first pirouette at age 4, the way she'd run to me after every performance, sweaty and glowing, demanding I feel how fast her heart was beating. Bradley's had been the simplest. A classic crew neck in forest green, his favorite color since he was 7 and decided he wanted to be a park ranger. No fancy cables or intricate color work, just honest, sturdy stitches that would last him through college and beyond. I'd knitted in the round, imagining him wearing it during late-night study sessions, pulling it close when he missed home. 3 sweaters. 3 grandchildren. 17 years of Christmas mornings where they'd actually worn my gifts, posed for photos, hugged me tight and said, "I love it, Grandma Lauren." But somewhere between their 13th and 16th birthdays, everything changed. The hugs became brief shoulder pats. The excited phone calls dwindled to obligatory holiday texts. Last Christmas, Chloe had opened my gift, a hand-embroidered scarf, smiled politely, and immediately set it aside for something with a brand name and a price tag. I should have seen the signs then. This year I'd mailed the packages early, December 10th, each one wrapped in gold foil paper with corners so sharp they could cut glass. Inside each box, alongside the sweater, I'd tucked a handwritten note. Not just, "Merry Christmas," but real letters. Memories of our time together, hopes for their futures, reminders of inside jokes we used to share. For Chloe, "Remember when you were 8 and insisted we have tea parties every Sunday? You'd make me wear that ridiculous feathered hat, and we'd discuss very important matters like whether unicorns preferred sugar cubes or honey in their tea. You always said I made the best cookies, but really you made the best memories." For Bryce, "Your grandfather would be so proud of the young man you've become. He always said you had his hands, steady and sure." I hope this sweater reminds you that some of the best things in life take time to create, just like the man you're becoming. For Bradley, "You once told me that trees were the earth's way of reaching toward heaven. Every time I see an oak tree now, I think of you and smile. May this sweater keep you warm while you're out there saving the world, one forest at a time." I'd signed each letter the same way, "All my love, Grandma Lauren, who believes in you always." Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and silence. I'd set my phone on the kitchen table, volume turned up high, coffee growing cold as I waited. Surely they'd call. At least Chloe, she'd always been the most sentimental. Nothing. Not a text. Not a voicemail. Not even one of those generic group messages teenagers send, "Thanks for the gift." I waited 3 days, checking my phone obsessively, refreshing social media to see if they'd posted any Christmas photos. There was Chloe in a new designer jacket, clearly expensive, definitely not handmade. Bryce with some gaming headset that probably cost more than the yarn for all 3 sweaters combined. Bradley wearing what looked like a store-bought hoodie, grinning beside a new skateboard. No sign of my gifts anywhere. On December 28th, I broke. I called Allison, my voice carefully neutral despite the hurricane in my chest. "Hi honey. Just wanted to make sure the packages arrived safely. I haven't heard from the kids." Her sigh came through the phone like a dismissal. "Mom, they got them. They're just busy." Too busy for a 2-minute phone call? Look, they appreciated the thought, but they're teenagers now. They have their own style, their own interests. Maybe next time just get them gift cards or something practical. Something practical. As if love could be practical. As if 17 years of Christmas traditions could be replaced with a piece of plastic and a preset dollar amount. I put a lot of work into those sweaters, Allison. Hours and hours. I used fabric from Dad's old shirts. Mom, please. They're not little kids anymore. They don't want homemade stuff. It's not personal. But it was personal. Every dropped stitch I'd carefully picked up. Every late night I'd stayed awake perfecting a pattern. Every time I'd held those sweaters up to imagine my grandchildren wearing them, feeling surrounded by love even when I wasn't there. I just thought they might call to say thank you, I whispered. They're teenagers now, Mom. Get over it. Get over it. Like 17 years of being their devoted grandmother was something to simply move past. Like the arthritis in my hands that made every stitch an act of determination didn't matter. Like the pieces of their grandfather I'd woven into those sweaters were just scraps of old fabric. After I hung up, I sat in Josh's old recliner, holding the ball of yarn I'd been saving for next Christmas. More of his flannel shirts, carefully unraveled and ready to become part of something new. I'd planned to make Bryce a vest, something he could wear over dress shirts when he started college interviews. Now I wondered if he'd even recognize the fabric. If any of them remembered their grandfather well enough to appreciate having a piece of him close to their hearts. The house felt smaller that night, filled with the echo of traditions that had outlived their welcome. I looked around at 17 years of framed Christmas photos. All those smiling faces in hand-knitted scarves and mittens, surrounded by the warmth of family and the promise that love like this would last forever. Apparently I'd been wrong about forever. The walk to my bedroom closet felt like a pilgrimage to a shrine I'd built without realizing it. Behind the sliding door lay 17 years of careful curation. Shelves lined with wrapped packages that had never found their way to the right hands. Boxes labeled with names and dates that had lost their meaning. There was the cashmere scarf I'd knitted for Chloe's 16th birthday, still pristine in tissue paper. She'd opened it, smiled briefly, then asked if I had the gift receipt because cashmere isn't really my vibe anymore, Grandma. Below it sat Bradley's unused fishing vest from 2 Christmas ago, hand-embroidered with tiny trout along the pockets, inspired by his childhood obsession with catching minnows in my backyard pond. He'd outgrown fishing the same summer he'd outgrown needing his grandmother. My fingers traced the edge of a photo album I'd never given to Allison, every page carefully arranged with pictures from her childhood, complete with handwritten captions in my best penmanship. Allison's first steps, taken right here in Grandma's kitchen. Reading bedtime stories until we both fell asleep. The day she learned to braid my hair and called herself my personal stylist. How had I not seen it before? I wasn't preserving memories, I was hoarding ghosts. Each item told the same story, my desperate attempt to keep loving people who had already moved on. The rejection from Christmas hadn't just stung, it had shattered something deeper. 4 months, maybe years, I'd been loving photographs instead of people, holding on to versions of my grandchildren that existed only in my carefully crafted memories. Chloe wasn't the little girl who insisted on matching pajamas for our sleepovers anymore. Bryce had stopped asking me to teach him card tricks. Bradley hadn't called me Lolo, his special name for me, in over 2 years. I'd been knitting sweaters for children who no longer existed, writing letters to hearts that had grown beyond needing my particular brand of love. The realization should have crushed me. Instead it felt like waking up. I pulled down the first box, Chloe's unused scarves and mittens from the past 3 years. Then Bryce's collection of hand-knitted caps that had never touched his head. Bradley's stack of personalized bookmarks for novels he'd never read. One by one, I emptied the closet onto my bed until the comforter disappeared beneath a mountain of misplaced affection. But it wasn't just their unused gifts. Deeper in the closet I found my own forgotten treasures. Photo albums from trips Josh and I had taken before the grandchildren were born. A jewelry box filled with earrings I'd deemed too fancy for everyday wear, saving them for occasions that never came. Books I'd bought but never read because I was too busy making things for people who didn't want them. Among the forgotten items, I discovered a wooden recipe box my own grandmother had given me 40 years ago. Inside, her handwritten cards were yellowed with age. Grammy's famous snickerdoodles, Sunday pot roast for the family, Lauren's favorite chocolate cake. Recipes I'd memorized but stopped making when the grandchildren decided they preferred store-bought desserts. My grandmother's neat cursive on those cards looked nothing like my own hurried scrawl on the gift tags I'd been writing for years. Hers were simple, made with love for my special girl. Mine had become desperate dissertations trying to explain the meaning behind every stitch, every choice, every carefully selected color. When had I stopped believing that love should be simple? I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of my own disappearance. Somewhere between first grandchild and now, I'd erased myself in favor of being their perfect grandmother. The one who remembered every preference, accommodated every phase, adapted to every change in their interests. I'd become a supporting character in my own life. The charity boxes started as 3 neat piles. Chloe, Bryce, Bradley. But as I sorted through items, the names began to blur. These weren't gifts rejected by specific people anymore. They were beautiful things, carefully made, thoughtfully chosen, that deserved to be loved by someone. I wrote "for someone who'll smile" on the first box in black marker, the letters bold and certain. Then the second box. Then the third. Each label felt like a small act of rebellion against the version of myself that had spent years apologizing for caring too much. The phone book still sat in my kitchen drawer, an artifact from a simpler time when finding help meant flipping through yellow pages instead of scrolling through screens. Harbor Light Shelter had a small advertisement, providing hope for displaced families and vulnerable youth. I'd donated money before, the occasional check written during guilty moments when I realized how blessed my own family was. I'd never considered that they might need more than money. Harbor Light Shelter, Maria speaking. Hi, I'm wondering if you accept donations of clothing and household items? Always. What did you have in mind? I looked at the boxes stacked beside my kitchen table, each one representing hours of work and hopeful love. Hand-knitted items mostly. Sweaters, scarves, blankets. Some photo frames and keepsakes. Things that were made to be cherished. Maria's voice warmed perceptibly. Oh honey, that sounds wonderful. We have kids here who've never owned anything made specially for them. When can you bring them by? That afternoon, I loaded my car with more care than I'd taken preparing for any Christmas morning. Each box was secured with seat belts, treated like the precious cargo it had always been meant to be. The drive to Harbor Light took 12 minutes. 12 minutes to travel from my world of unappreciated abundance to a place where appreciation still existed. The building looked smaller than I'd expected. A converted Victorian house with cheerful yellow trim and flower boxes that someone was tending despite the January cold. Through the windows I could see children of various ages gathered around tables, working on homework or playing quiet games. Maria met me at the door, a woman about my age with kind eyes and hands that showed the calluses of someone who worked with purpose. You must be Lauren. Let me help you with those boxes. As we carried them inside, a little girl with dark braids and serious eyes approached us. She couldn't have been more than 7, wearing jeans that were too big and a sweater that had seen better days. Are those really for us? She asked, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and disbelief that made my chest tight. I knelt down to her level, meeting those serious eyes with my own. Yes, sweetheart. From Grandma Lauren. The smile that spread across her face was like sunrise after the longest night. That little girl's name was Sophia, and she wore my forest green sweater, the one originally meant for Bradley, like it was made of gold thread. The sleeves were too long, but she'd rolled them up carefully, creating perfect cuffs that she smoothed down every few minutes as if afraid the magic might disappear. Can you teach me to make one like this? She asked during my second visit to Harbor Light, her small fingers tracing the cable pattern I'd spent weeks perfecting. I found myself saying yes before I'd even thought it through. By the 3rd week of January, I had established what Maria laughingly called Grandma Lauren's Corner in the shelter's common room. Every Thursday at 2 o'clock I'd arrive with my oversized knitting bag, thermoses of hot cocoa, and enough yarn for whoever wanted to learn. The response was overwhelming, not just from the children but from the teenage mothers who watched from the doorway, trying to look disinterested while clearly longing to join in. 8-year-old Marcus was my most eager student. He'd been at Harbor Light for 3 months after his mother lost their apartment in a kitchen fire. His thin fingers struggled with the yarn at first, but he had the kind of determination that reminded me of myself at his age, when my own grandmother had taught me to knit during long summer afternoons. Grandma Lauren, he said during our 4th lesson, the word rolling off his tongue as naturally as breathing, can you show me how to make the bumpy parts like on Sophia's sweater? Grandma Lauren. No hesitation, no awkwardness, no need to earn the title through years of birthday gifts and Christmas traditions. Just acceptance, pure and simple. Within a month, I had 6 regular students ranging from age 7 to 17. Sophia, Marcus, and twin sisters named Emma and Lily who'd been living in their car with their mother before finding Harbor Light. There was also Jake, a lanky 15-year-old who initially claimed knitting was only for girls, but couldn't resist the challenge of creating something with his own hands. Most surprising was Destiny, a 16-year-old mother with a baby daughter named Hope. She'd watch our lessons while bouncing Hope on her hip, and one day I simply handed her a pair of needles. "I don't know how," she protested. "Neither did they when they started," I replied, nodding toward Sophia and Marcus, who were now confidently working on simple scarves. During our sessions they asked questions that pierced straight through to my heart. Sophia wanted to know if I had grandchildren of my own. Marcus asked why I came every week when nobody was paying me. Emma wondered if I'd ever teach them to make fancy stuff, like the sweaters they'd seen in my donation boxes. But it was Jake who asked the question that changed everything. "Grandma Lauren, do you think some people just don't know how to appreciate good things?" I paused in the middle of demonstrating a knit stitch, his words hitting closer to home than he could have known. "Sometimes, sweetie. Sometimes people get so busy looking for the next big thing that they forget to see the beautiful things right in front of them." "That's dumb," Sophia declared with the brutal honesty only children possess. "If somebody made me something this nice, I'd wear it every single day." These children, who had every reason to be bitter, who'd lost homes and stability and security, were teaching me about gratitude in ways my own grandchildren never had. My phone started ringing regularly, but the calls weren't from Faisalabad or wherever Allison's family happened to be that week. They were from Maria, updating me on new arrivals who might benefit from our knitting circle. From other volunteers who'd heard about our program and wanted to help. From local yarn shops offering to donate supplies. One particularly memorable call came from Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman whose knitting group at the senior center had disbanded when too many members passed away or moved to assisted living. "I heard about what you're doing," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "I have bags and bags of yarn just sitting here. Could you use them?" That Saturday, Mrs. Henderson arrived at Harbor Light with enough supplies to keep us busy for months. She stayed for hot cocoa and stories, and by the time she left, she'd signed up to co-teach our Thursday sessions. It was during one of these expanded sessions in late January that my personal phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Chloe had posted a new photo, herself in a trendy oversized hoodie, arms spread wide in what teenagers called a fit check. The caption read, "Wish I got something cool for Christmas #winter style." I stared at that post for a full minute, sitting in Harbor Light's common room while Sophia showed off her nearly finished scarf to anyone who'd look. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. Here was my granddaughter, publicly lamenting her lack of cool Christmas gifts, while 50 feet away, children who'd lost everything wore my hand-knitted creations like crowns. "Grandma Lauren, are you okay?" Marcus asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "I'm perfect, honey," I said, tucking my phone away. And for the first time in months I actually meant it. The call from Allison came 3 days later, during my Thursday evening quiet time, what used to be my waiting for grandchildren to call time but had become my planning next week's knitting lesson time. "Mom, what's this I hear about you volunteering at some shelter?" Her tone carried that familiar edge of barely contained irritation. "I teach knitting to children there. It's very fulfilling. But why there? Why not volunteer at the kids' school or something family-related?" The question revealed everything I needed to know about how she viewed my life, as something that should revolve entirely around her family's orbit. "Because these children appreciate what I have to offer," I said simply. "The kids just forgot to call it Christmas, okay? It's not that deep. They're busy with school and friends and—" "Allison, stop." My voice was gentler than I felt. "I'm not angry. I'm not holding grudges. I'm just done chasing people who treat me like background noise." Silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken expectations and mismatched priorities. "That's not fair, Mom." Fair would have been a 2-minute phone call to say thank you. Fair would have been acknowledging that someone spent 47 hours making something specifically for you. Fair would have been remembering that your children have a grandmother who loves them. They know you love them. Do they? Because their actions suggest otherwise. Another pause, longer this time. So what, you're just giving up on your own family? I looked around Harbor Light's common room, where photos of our knitting circle decorated one wall. Children beaming while holding up their latest creations, teenagers who'd learned that their hands could make beautiful things, mothers who discovered they had more strength than they'd realized. I'm not giving up on family, honey. I'm just expanding my definition of it. After I hung up with Allison, the house felt different, not empty but purposeful. I walked to my craft room, which had been Josh's home office before he passed, and spread out a large sheet of butcher paper across his old desk. At the top I wrote in bold letters, Grandma's Corner, monthly care packages. The idea had been brewing since my conversation with Jake about people not appreciating good things. These shelter kids deserved more than my Thursday visits and weekly knitting lessons. They deserved to know that someone was thinking about them when they weren't around, that they mattered enough to receive surprises just because. I divided the paper into columns: recipient names, interests, sizes, and what I called heart notes, special things I'd noticed about each child that I wanted to celebrate. Sophia loved purple and always asked about my grandmother's cookie recipes. Marcus collected smooth stones from the shelter's small garden and lined them up on his windowsill. Emma had mentioned wanting to learn to read music, while Lily dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. The first monthly boxes took me 3 weeks to prepare. Each one contained a hand-knitted item, scarves for the February cold, along with something special I'd chosen specifically for that child. Sophia got a purple scarf and a handwritten collection of my grandmother's easiest cookie recipes, complete with illustrations. Marcus received a deep blue scarf and a book about geology I'd found at the library's used book sale. But it was the personalized notes that made me cry as I wrote them. Dear Sophia, you asked me if your smile reminds me of anyone. It reminds me of sunshine after rain and of every good thing I've ever hoped for. Keep shining, sweetheart. Love, Grandma Lauren. Marcus, your hands are learning to create beautiful things just like your heart creates joy wherever you go. These stones you collect remind me that even small things can be treasures when someone notices their beauty. You notice everything beautiful, sweet boy. Love, Grandma Lauren. Word spread faster than I anticipated. During my third Thursday session in February, Mrs. Henderson arrived with her neighbor, Dorothy, who'd recently lost her husband and was looking for ways to fill the silence in her house. Dorothy brought her sister-in-law, Ruth, who'd been estranged from her own children for over a decade after a family argument she could barely remember anymore. By March, our little group had grown to 8 women, ranging in age from 57 to 82. We met every Tuesday evening in my living room, which suddenly felt alive with purpose and conversation. Each woman had her own story of displacement, from grandchildren who'd outgrown them, from children who'd grown too busy or too distant, from families that had shrunk through death or disagreement. Ruth surprised us all by admitting she'd never learned to knit. I was always too proud to ask for help, she said, her fingers fumbling with the needles as Dorothy patiently showed her the basic stitches. Figured I'd missed my chance. There's no expiration date on learning something that brings joy, Mrs. Henderson replied, and I saw Ruth's shoulders relax for the first time since she'd joined us. We established a system. Each woman adopted 2 shelter residents and committed to monthly care packages. But what started as a knitting circle evolved into something deeper. We became research partners, hunting down book series when we discovered a child's reading preferences, sharing recipes when someone mentioned missing their grandmother's cooking, pooling money to buy art supplies for budding artists. Dorothy, who'd been a librarian for 40 years, started including carefully selected books in every package. Ruth, despite being our newest knitter, had a gift for writing encouraging notes that made the teenagers cry happy tears. Mrs. Henderson contributed her late husband's collection of National Geographic magazines, which became treasured items among the kids who dreamed of seeing the world beyond their current circumstances. The transformation wasn't just in the shelter children, it was in us. Tuesday evenings became the highlight of my week, filled with laughter and shared purpose in ways my quiet house hadn't experienced since Josh died. We celebrated each other's successes. Ruth's first completed scarf, Dorothy's granddaughter finally returning her calls, Mrs. Henderson's decision to adopt a cat from the animal shelter. In April, a reporter from the local newspaper contacted me after hearing about our program from Maria at Harbor Light. Janet Morrison was a feature writer looking for positive community stories, and something about our group had caught her attention. "I'd like to write about what you're doing," she said during our phone call. This kind of intergenerational connection, women supporting displaced youth. It's exactly the kind of story our readers need to hear. The interview took place at Harbor Light on a Thursday afternoon, surrounded by our knitting students and their latest projects. Janet asked thoughtful questions about how the program started, what motivated us to continue, and what we'd learned from the experience. What would you say to other grandmothers who might be feeling disconnected from their own families? She asked, her pen poised over her notepad. I thought about Allison's dismissive words about Christmas morning silence, about 17 years of traditions that had quietly faded away. I'd tell them that love doesn't have to be limited by DNA. Sometimes the family that chooses you loves you better than the family you were born into. The article appeared on a sunny Thursday in late April, complete with a photo of me surrounded by Sophia, Marcus, and the twins, all of us holding up our latest knitting projects. The headline read, "Disowned by blood, embraced by heart. Local grandmother finds new family through community service." My smile in that photo was genuine in a way it hadn't been for family pictures in years. These children, these Tuesday evening women, this purposeful life I'd built from the ashes of rejection, it had given me back myself. The article's impact was immediate. My phone rang constantly for days. Other women wanting to join our group, shelter directors from neighboring towns asking about starting similar programs, yarn stores offering donations. But the call that surprised me most came on a Saturday evening, 3 days after the article ran. "Mom." Allison's voice was different, smaller somehow. "I saw the newspaper article. Chloe and Bryce saw it too. They asked me why you didn't send them anything for their birthdays this year." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. I told them the truth. That you spent years making them beautiful things and they never even called to say thank you. Bryce actually cried, "Mom." He said he didn't realize you'd stopped trying. "I didn't stop trying, honey. I just started trying somewhere else." The conversation that followed was longer and more honest than any we'd had in years. But for the first time in months, I wasn't the one doing all the emotional labor. That conversation with Allison lingered in the quiet corners of my house for days afterward. Her words about Bryce crying had cracked something open inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of sad recognition that maybe they had cared more than their silence suggested. Maybe they just didn't know how to bridge the gap their neglect had created. 3 nights later, I sat at Josh's old roll-top desk, the one he'd inherited from his father and never quite fit his long legs under properly. I pulled out a sheet of my good stationery, the cream-colored paper with my initials embossed at the top that I'd been saving for special occasions, that never seemed important enough. "Dear Chloe," I began, then stopped. My hand hovered over the paper as 17 years of memories flooded back. Not the hurt ones this time, but the golden ones I'd been afraid to revisit. "I'm writing this letter not because I'm angry, but because there are things you should know about your grandfather that I realized I never properly told you." The words flowed easier than I expected. I wrote about the morning Josh had taught 4-year-old Chloe to fish, how she'd insisted on braiding dandelions into his hair while they waited for the fish to bite. I wrote about the way he'd light up when she performed her made-up dance routines in our living room, how he'd applaud so enthusiastically that the neighbors probably thought we were hosting concerts. "Your grandfather had this ritual every time you visited. He'd press a penny into your palm and tell you to make a wish on it, then throw it in the old wishing well at the park. You'd always wish for the same thing. I wish Grandpa and Lolo live forever. He kept a coffee can full of pennies just for your visits. After he died, I found it in the garage with a note, for Chloe's forever wishes." He believed in magic. I believed in her. I sealed that letter in an envelope, writing her name in my careful cursive, then pulled out another sheet. "Dear Bryce," this one began. "Your sweater, the one you never wore, had pieces of your grandfather's favorite flannel shirt woven into the cables across the chest. Not random pieces but specific ones. The pocket where he kept his reading glasses. The collar that smelled like his aftershave even after I washed it. The sleeve cuff that got paint on it when you two built that birdhouse in our garage." I wrote about Josh's gentle hands teaching Bryce to whittle, how they'd spend hours on the back porch creating miniature animals from scraps of pine. I wrote about the way Josh had saved every single one of Bryce's school drawings, even the abstract ones from kindergarten that looked like colorful explosions. He used to say you had steady hands and a steady heart, just like his own father. When you were 8, you made him a wooden fish during one of those whittling sessions. He carried it in his wallet until the day he died. It's still there in the wallet I keep in his dresser drawer, worn smooth from his fingers. The third letter was the hardest. Bradley had been Josh's shadow in those early years, following him around the yard as he tended his vegetable garden, asking endless questions about why tomatoes grew up instead of down and whether earthworms had feelings. Dear Bradley, I wrote, my handwriting growing shakier as emotion threatened to overwhelm me. Your grandfather taught you to love growing things because he said you had earth hands, hands that could coax life from soil. Remember the sunflower contest when you were 7? You were convinced yours would grow taller than the garage. Josh secretly fertilized it extra every morning before you woke up, then acted amazed when it reached 12 feet tall. I wrote about Josh's pride in Bradley's environmental awareness, how he'd beam when his youngest grandson would lecture adults about recycling or insist on walking instead of driving to save the planet. I wrote about the tree they'd planted together in our backyard. A small oak that was now taller than the house, its roots deep and strong. That tree blooms every spring and I think about both of you when I see it. He said trees were the earth's way of showing us that some things grow stronger when their roots go deep. Your roots are deep, Bradley, even if you've forgotten where you planted them. 3 letters. 3 grandchildren. 3 sealed envelopes that sat on my desk like unexploded emotions. I couldn't bring myself to mail them, but I couldn't throw them away either. They contained too much truth, too much love, too much of Josh's memory to simply discard. But they also felt like artifacts from a version of myself I was still learning to let go of. The grandmother who explained and justified and pleaded for understanding. Instead, I placed them in the desk's secret compartment, the small hidden drawer Josh had shown me years ago when we'd first inherited the piece from his father. Every good desk has secrets, he'd said, winking as he demonstrated the tiny brass catch that released the hidden space. Maybe someday my grandchildren would be ready to read these letters. Maybe they'd search through my belongings after I was gone and discover them, finally understanding the depth of what they'd casually discarded. Maybe they'd never find them at all. The uncertainty felt strangely liberating. That same week, Sophia graduated from our beginner knitting class to advanced techniques. She'd mastered cables and was ready to attempt lace patterns. Intricate, delicate work that required patience and precision. As I watched her small fingers confidently manipulate the yarn, creating beauty from simple loops and twists, I realized something profound. I was no longer knitting to fill empty spaces or to prove my worth. I was knitting because these children asked me to teach them, because they wanted to learn something I could share, because the act itself had become a meditation on connection rather than a desperate attempt to maintain it. Ruth brought her first completed sweater to our Tuesday meeting. A simple pullover in sky blue that she'd made for her adopted shelter teen, a 14-year-old named Crystal who was aging out of the foster system. Ruth's stitches were slightly uneven, her seams a bit wobbly, but Crystal had worn it to school every day for a week and sent a photo of herself grinning in it. She calls me Grandma Ruth, Ruth said, her voice thick with emotion. No one's called me Grandma in 15 years. Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. It's different when they choose you, isn't it? When you're not trying to earn love, just giving it. That night, I opened the secret drawer one more time and looked at those 3 sealed letters. They represented the mother and grandmother I used to be. The one who felt compelled to explain every emotion, to justify every hurt feeling, to teach lessons even when no one was listening. I closed the drawer gently, leaving the letters in their hidden darkness. Perhaps they'd remain there forever, or perhaps someday they'd serve their purpose. But for now they were simply there. Truth preserved in a safe place, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. I had other letters to write now. Thank you notes to yarn shop owners who donated supplies. Birthday cards for shelter children who'd never received mail addressed specifically to them. Messages of encouragement for the women in our Tuesday circle who were learning to redirect their nurturing energy toward grateful hearts. Letters that would actually be read. Letters that mattered to their recipients. Letters that built bridges instead of burning them. Winter arrived early that year, and with it came the familiar rhythm of clicking needles and soft yarn sliding through my fingers. But the sound echoed differently now, not in the hollow quiet of a house waiting for appreciation that never came, but in the warm buzz of my living room filled with the Tuesday circle, or the cheerful chaos of Harbor Light's common room. Marcus, now 9 and grown 2 inches since I'd first met him, sat beside me during our Thursday session, his own needles working steadily on a scarf for his baby sister. His mother had found stable housing and they'd be leaving Harbor Light soon. A success story that filled my heart even as it reminded me that these relationships too were temporary. Grandma Lauren, he said, pausing to untangle a dropped stitch, can you tell me more about your husband? The one whose shirts you put in the sweaters. I smiled, reaching for the ball of soft gray yarn that had once been Josh's weekend gardening shirt. What would you like to know, sweetheart? Did he like to build things? My dad used to build things before he went away. The question hung in the air with such vulnerable hope that I had to swallow past the sudden tightness in my throat. He loved building things. Birdhouses mostly. And he taught my grandson. I caught myself, the old possessive language feeling foreign now. He taught a little boy I used to know how to whittle wooden animals. Marcus nodded solemnly. Could you teach me? I promise I'd be careful with the knife. That afternoon I stopped by the hardware store and bought a beginner's whittling kit. The clerk, a young man about Bradley's age, smiled when I explained it was for a boy at the shelter. My grandmother taught me to whittle, he said. Best gift anyone ever gave me was showing me my hands could make something beautiful. The whittling lessons became part of our routine. Marcus had Josh's patience and steady hands, and within weeks he'd created a small menagerie of wooden creatures. Each time he finished a piece, he'd hold it up with the same pride I remembered seeing in Bradley's eyes all those years ago. But it was during one of these lessons that the phone call came, the one I'd been unconsciously dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Mom. Allison's voice was strained, different from our previous conversations. Chloe wants to talk to you. She's been asking about you since the newspaper article. My heart did something complicated. A flutter of hope mixed with protective skepticism. Put her on. Grandma Lauren? Chloe's voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that reminded me of the little girl who used to call me when she had nightmares. Hi, sweetheart. I saw the article. About the shelter and the knitting and everything. Pause. Mom told me about the sweater. The Christmas one. I didn't know you. I didn't realize. I waited, letting her find her words while Marcus continued his whittling beside me, giving me something to focus on besides the racing of my pulse. I'm sorry, she finally whispered. We all are. Bryce cried when Mom told him about Grandpa's shirt being in his sweater. We didn't know you put part of him in there. The apology I'd once desperately craved now felt strange, too late and too early all at once. Thank you for saying that, Chloe. Could I maybe come visit sometime? I want to see what you're doing at the shelter. And maybe learn to knit? I never asked you to teach me, but I should have. The old me would have said yes immediately, would have started planning lessons and special projects and ways to recapture lost time. The new me paused, looking around at the life I'd built from the pieces of my broken expectations. The shelter always welcomes volunteers, I said carefully. If you're serious about learning to knit, I teach classes every Thursday at 2. I meant, could I come to your house? Like we used to. Oh, honey. The endearment slipped out before I could stop it. My house isn't really set up for teaching anymore. All my supplies are at the shelter now. But you're welcome to join us there. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of changed relationships and shifted priorities. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller still. You don't want to see me alone, do you? The question pierced through my carefully constructed defenses. The truth was complicated. I did want to see her, but not the way we used to exist together, with me performing grandmotherhood while she passively received it. If she wanted to be part of my life now, it would be on different terms. I want to see you learning something new, I said finally. I want to see you caring about something beyond yourself. The shelter would be good for that. Mother's Day arrived with an unseasonably warm morning and a text from Allison. Kids said Happy Mother's Day. Hope you're well. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a donation to Harbor Light. Not a large amount, but enough to buy art supplies for their after-school program. In the memo line, I wrote, in honor of the mothers who choose to love without condition. The real Mother's Day gift came later that afternoon. Sophia, now 10 and preparing to move to a transitional housing program with her mother, knocked on my door with a carefully wrapped package. Happy Mother's Day, Grandma Lauren, she said, beaming as she handed me the gift. Inside was a hand-knitted bookmark, crooked stitches and uneven tension, but made with the kind of concentrated love that perfectionism could never match. Attached was a note in her careful handwriting. Thank you for teaching me that my hands can make beautiful things. You are the best grandma in the world. I cried then, holding that imperfect bookmark like the treasure it was. 2 weeks later, Emma, one of the twins who'd been living in their car, graduated from high school. The ceremony was held at the Civic Center, and I sat in the audience wearing my best dress and clutching a bouquet of flowers, surrounded by other families celebrating their children's achievements. When Emma's name was called, she looked directly at me and waved, her smile brighter than the stage lights. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd and threw her arms around my neck. "Grandma Lauren, you're the only family I wanted here," she whispered against my ear. "Thank you for believing I could do this." Standing there, holding this brave young woman who'd overcome homelessness and uncertainty to reach this moment, I realized something profound. The ache in my chest, the one that had lived there since that silent Christmas morning, was still present, but it had transformed. It was no longer the sharp pain of rejection, but the tender soreness of a heart that had stretched to accommodate more love than it had ever imagined possible. I thought about those 3 letters hidden in Josh's desk, about my grandchildren who were finally reaching out, about the complicated dance of forgiveness and boundaries that lay ahead. Maybe they would become part of this new life I'd built. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time since Christmas, the uncertainty didn't terrify me. I had learned the difference between giving love and begging for it. And that knowledge, hard-won and precious, was the kindest gift I'd ever given myself. If this heartwarming revenge story touched your heart, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lauren found her true family at the shelter and heard Grandma Lauren for the first time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Want more inspiring stories of second chances and finding where you truly belong? Subscribe and hit that notification bell.